Beginning life as a pet project of Turkish student Galip Kartaglu, the game that would eventually become Dual Blades was never meant to land on the Game Boy Advance. When Galip reached out to games industry veteran and fellow Turk Mev Dink on advice for bringing his game to market, Dink noted the rampant issue of PC game piracy in Turkey and advised Kartaglu to instead make his game for Nintendo's newest handheld. Through a variety of connections Dink had accrued over his 2 decades in the industry up to that point, he was able to get Kartaglu a license to develop for the GBA at a time when Nintendo wasn't issuing such licenses to Turkish game makers. Dink would also help him secure a global distribution deal for Dual Blades through publisher Metro 3D Incorporated. For a game mostly made by one man, it shows, if only in the graphics department. There, it very much looks like a fan-made Flash game, but everything else about it stands out in the best of ways. Galip's fighting game fandom is immediately obvious upon booting up the game. Dual Blades uses a button notation that is almost exactly the same as Guilty Gear, with the exception of it not having a dust button. The game's buttons are S for slash, BS for big slash, our heavy slash equivalent, a kick button, and a button labeled by the letter P, though here it means power, as in magical power. Further inspiration from Guilty Gear is easily noticeable, given that one of the characters is just straight up a Testament clone, crows and all. And the game has its own version of Roman cancels, though here it's called Recovery. It lets you kill the recovery of any move by holding down slash and big slash when you have at least 20-ish% meter. Dual Blades also comes packing its own variant of burst, which it calls Breaker, done by holding back plus both your slashes when taking damage. It makes sense that a fan game would wear its inspirations on its sleeve, but Dual Blades never gets to the point of feeling like a Guilty Gear ripoff. For one, it did a good job of understanding the platform it was on and eschewing motion inputs that use a diagonal direction. The special move inputs in Dual Blades only use up, down, left, and right, as is the case with Mortal Kombat games. But unlike Mortal Kombat's first GBA outing, the controls in Dual Blades are on the money in terms of responsiveness. Though, at least in my case, I felt like I had to wait a bit longer between moves to get combos and special inputs to work correctly. That's not a fault or a criticism, just something you need to be aware of if you want to play this game, that you have to slow down when trying to get things off. For a game with all these mechanics and a bevy of supers and special moves for each of its 8 characters, Dual Blades makes it incredibly easy to learn about how to use what it has to offer. Its training mode is great, complete with explanations on all the mechanics I've mentioned, along with move lists for your character and the character you're facing against or training with. The move list layout actually messed me up early on, because tapping right on the D-pad brings up your opponent's moves, not your own. I thought the game was broken at first because the commands I was doing weren't causing anything new to happen for my character. You're probably thinking, oh go, you're an idiot, you didn't read your character's name? On the character select screen? No, and I didn't expect that to be an issue because it never has been. The problem with Dual Blades is that in training mode, the characters' names are not listed on screen, anywhere, and the way this stuff has always worked in the menus is that going right brings up your character's moves first, with a lot of games not even having the option to see your opponent's specials. And again, you must be thinking I'm an idiot, until I inform you that tapping right a second time does nothing here, which means that you have to unintuitively tap left on the main commands page to see your own character's specials and supers. So yeah, that was annoying enough to get its own paragraph. 2 UI quirks that just had no reason to be things. But on that note, this is where anything negative I have to say about Dual Blades has come to an end. The more I look at this game, the more I'm left thinking that Dual Blades just gets it. This game has a great understanding of how to play on the platform it's on, while adding depth in ways that don't ask the player to use the GBA in an unintuitive way. The simple direction special inputs are one thing. Then it gets better by having one button entirely dedicated to supers, made even better still with each character having multiple supers, all of which retain the same basic input structure as your special moves. On the character select screen, you're brought to a super selection menu that offers you 2 pairs of supers for you to use in battle. The pair you pick will alter the length of your super meter, similar to the Street Fighter 3 games. Dual Blades emulates Street Fighter 3 in another obvious way by having a parry system which functions exactly as it does in those games. With Guilty Gear and Street Fighter already mentioned, I'd like to point out the last obvious source of Galeep's inspiration: Samurai Showdown. This is apparent through the game's violent and bloody end match screens that gave it its M rating. And with how the character Jamon seems heavily inspired by Genon, who debuted in the original Samurai Showdown. This extreme willingness to display its inspirations is something the game received heavy criticism for by reviewers, with many giving it a mediocre rating for shamelessly yanking ideas from other developers while not doing anything big or new on its own. And while that's not an unfair criticism, the game doesn't feel like a step in a new direction in terms of mechanics. I'm pretty okay with that. Dual Blades is as good as anything the major fighting game publishers would put on the Game Boy Advance, though I do think it shot itself in the foot by not toning down the violence enough to achieve a lower age rating. Mortal Kombat can get away with an M rating on a kid-centric platform because it's one of the most well-known gaming brands ever. Dual Blades, on the other hand, doesn't have the market cachet to override its rating on this specific platform. I'm trying to picture a scenario in which an average consumer who was willing to buy an M-rated fighting game on the Game Boy Advance of all things would give this game a look instead of just defaulting to Mortal Kombat and not thinking about it further. But to judge it in this way would be to miss the point of what makes it special. This is a fan game that broke through, no different than how Skullgirls would a decade later. I really like Dual Blades. It's got a charm unique to its era that reminded me of the Nacho Libre Flash game I'd play in computer class, but obviously with a lot more depth. So far as I can tell, it's also one of the first fighting games to have combo trials, and is likely the first to have them on a handheld platform. Going by how I rate games in this series, Dual Blades passes with flying colors. You give this to a kid as their first fighting game, and they'll be asking if you have any others they can play. It's a surprisingly good introduction to what the genre has to offer while being a fun experience on its own. Shockingly, this isn't the last we'd see of Dual Blades. 18 years after its debut on the Game Boy Advance, it would receive a mobile phone version titled Slashers: The Power Battle, and this game is really something special. Its controls are lenient and its button layout respects how little space is available on a phone screen. The game also comes packed with Journey mode, where you collect currency during battles and use them to upgrade your character between matches, quite similar to Guilty Gear's Millionaire mode. So far, Dual Blades is 2 for 2 in terms of amazing mobile entries. Then in 2021, the third game in this series got released on Steam and for the Nintendo Switch, Dual Souls: The Last Bearer. Now, what I had originally recorded for this section was me saying that this entry failed to live up to the previous game because of graphics and whatever else. And while yes, the graphics here aren't what I'd call great by PC or console standards, everything else about this third entry is great, seamlessly building off of the additions made in the mobile game to end up being one of the more complete fighting games in terms of modes and options, on top of being fun to play. Dual Souls comes packed with rollback netcode for online play, along with additional single-player offerings such as a challenge mode, the combo trials that had been present since the GBA release, and a whole combo maker mode that lets you share your combos around the world, just like what Guilty Gear Strive has. If you go into this game with the right expectations, it's going to look like a modernized Flash game, live with it, you will be blown away by everything else that it has to offer. This game is a standout of the genre, despite what it may look like. Dual Souls is currently available on Steam for $5.99 USD, with the Complete Edition costing $13.50. The Complete Edition includes the GBA game and the mobile game playable within the PC game, and I recommend checking out all three. I went into this script knowing nothing about any of them, and coming out the other side, I hope to see more of what this series can achieve. This fan game has made a fan out of me. In the spirit of Dual Blades and how it pulled from other fighting games, if you could pick any fighting game character to be a guest in another fighting game, who would it be and what game would they be joining? I'll keep my answer limited to +R because of the Diary series, and say I'd want to add Keelik from Soul Calibur 6 to the roster. I think it would be cool to have a bow staff user that uses their staff like it's used in traditional martial arts. One interesting part of Keelik's kit is his command parries. Instead of them catching either high/mid or low attacks, as is the case with Axel's command parries in +R, Keelik's parries work based on if the move is horizontal or vertical, and both come with a variety of follow-up attacks that can be delayed a fair bit. I think he'd be a fun character to add to the fold. Anyways, that'll do it for me. Peace.